What if I told you that the lowest point of your life, the very moment when you feel broken beyond repair, could become the foundation of the strongest version of yourself? Would you believe me, or would you laugh it off, saying that pain only destroys and never builds? This is the paradox most people never see until they are pushed to the edge, that rock bottom is not the end, but the beginning of something unimaginable. Let me take you into the life of a man named Daniel, whose story reveals how despair, when embraced rather than feared, becomes the soil where strength, clarity, and destiny grow. Daniel had always believed he was destined for something more. As a child, he carried wild dreams, whispering to himself at night that one day he would build something that mattered, that one day people would remember his name. But life, as it often does, tested those dreams with brutal force. At 28, Daniel lost his job at a company he had given 5 years to. One morning, he walked into the office expecting a routine meeting and walked out with a box of belongings, his badge deactivated, his identity as an employee erased in seconds. He wandered the streets in silence that day, clutching the box to his chest as though it contained fragments of his broken dignity. For weeks afterward, Daniel spiraled. His friends told him to stay positive, to keep applying for jobs, but deep inside he carried a heavy voice that whispered, "You're a failure. You gave everything and ended with nothing." At night he stared at the ceiling, replaying the last day at his company, hearing again the indifferent tone of his boss explaining that it was just business. Those words haunted him, making him feel small, insignificant, disposable. He often whispered to himself in the dark, saying that maybe his life didn't matter at all. But in those nights of despair, another voice began to stir within him. It was faint at first, but persistent. It reminded him of conversations he had once had with his grandfather, a man who had survived war and poverty. Daniel remembered how his grandfather used to tell him that true strength is never built when life is easy, but only when life strips you bare. He would say, "When everything is taken from you, when the world laughs at you, that is when you find the fire inside, not before." These words echoed in Daniel's mind, colliding with his despair. He argued with them, telling himself they were just old sayings, but another part of him wanted desperately to believe. One evening, sitting on the floor of his small apartment, Daniel picked up an old notebook. It was filled with sketches, ideas, and plans he had written years ago when he still believed in himself. Among those notes, he saw an idea for a small project he had once dreamed of building. Something simple but meaningful. His first instinct was to laugh bitterly at it, mocking himself for being so foolish back then. But as he kept turning the pages, his heart softened. He whispered quietly that perhaps his younger self had seen something he had lost sight of. That perhaps those ideas were not childish dreams, but seeds waiting for the right storm to break open. That night, instead of drowning in despair, Daniel began sketching again. His hands trembled, his mind doubted, but he pressed on. He told himself that he had nothing left to lose, so why not create? Why not try? In the weeks that followed, he poured himself into the project, not for money, not for recognition, but simply to remind himself that he was still capable of building something. His small apartment became a workshop, messy and alive with the fragments of his ideas. And though no one else saw it yet, Daniel began to feel the faint stirrings of hope again. As months passed, something shifted. His project grew, slowly, clumsily, but undeniably. Friends who had once pitied him began to notice the fire in his eyes returning. They asked what he was working on, and though he downplayed it, inside he felt something sacred, a sense of purpose awakening. One evening, a close friend visited, and after listening to Daniel describe his project, leaned back and said with quiet conviction, "You do realize this is exactly what you're meant to do, right?" Those words pierced through Daniel's doubt. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine that maybe he was not lost after all, but finally on the right path. The journey was not easy. There were nights when nothing worked, when his projects failed, when exhaustion made him question everything. He often found himself muttering in frustration that he was wasting his time. But then he would remember his grandfather's voice, reminding him that strength is forged in fire, not comfort. He realized that every failure, every sleepless night, was not a step backward, but a step deeper into the person he was meant to become. Years later, when Daniel's small project grew into a thriving business, people admired his success. They asked him how he did it, how he had the courage to start. And Daniel would smile, remembering those nights when he was alone in the dark, whispering words of despair. He would tell them softly that his success was not born in inspiration, but in desperation. That the very moment he thought his life was over was the moment he was finally free to build the life he was meant for. He would say, "Rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the foundation I needed. And so I return to you." What if I told you that the darkest night of your life is not proof that you are broken, but proof that you are being prepared? What if I told you that the job you lost, the relationship that ended, the failure that haunts you, is not the closing of your story, but the opening of a chapter you never imagined? Would you believe me, or would you, like Daniel once did, shake your head and whisper that your pain is too great? Because the truth is, life will strip you down. It will break your heart. It will crush your pride. It will take away things you thought you could never live without. And in those moments, you will be tempted to believe that everything is over. But if you dare to listen, you will hear another voice inside, a voice that whispers that perhaps this is not your destruction, but your rebirth. That perhaps you are being forced to stop clinging to what was, so that you can begin building what can be. Daniel's story is not unique because of the business he built or the recognition he gained. It is unique because he chose not to let rock bottom bury him. He chose to let it break open the seed of strength inside him. And you too carry that seed. You may not see it yet, but it is there, waiting, buried beneath your doubt. Every tear you've cried has watered it. Every failure has cracked its shell. And one day, when you finally decide to stop listening to the voice of despair, you will see it sprout. So the next time you find yourself whispering that you are finished, remember this. What feels like the end is often the beginning. What feels like death is often rebirth. And rock bottom, though it feels like a grave, is often the solid ground upon which you will build the strongest version of yourself.